I would like to extend a warm welcome to all members of the Environment and Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel, officers, members of the public and press in attendance at today's meeting of the 8th of September 2022. Welcome to those who may be watching the meeting live on YouTube. I am Councillor Steve Rippon-Swain, Chairman of the Environment and Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's website and on YouTube. It will remain available for a minimum of 12 months. I would remind those in attendance to use your microphones when speaking and remembering to switch them off once you have finished speaking. Also, could you please switch off any mobile devices either to silent setting or off for the duration of the meeting. For the benefit of those watching the meeting online, please would members introduce themselves during the meeting, if not already introduced by name. Thank you. First is apologies.
We've received apologies from Councillor Alan Glass, Councillor Stephanie Osborne and Edward Heron and Diane Andrews.
Could I just add here, panel members, just a word that you're all probably aware that our co-member Alan Glass has not been well recently. I'm glad to hear that he is back home and on recovery, and I'm sure we wish him the very best of continued improvement and look forward to seeing to return to our benches. So our thoughts go to him for the moment. Thank you. Next is item number 1 is the minutes from the previous meeting. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of June 2022. Are we agreed that's an accurate record of the minute? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you, members. To the usual declarations of interest, if any members, when they have interests, to declare now or at the time that they may remember as the subject arises. Item 3 is public participation. There is none. And on to item 4. This is a bit thin as well, but anyway, we have absence in the leader, Councillor Edward Heron and Councillor Diane Andrews. If anybody has a question to ask about their dashboard, I'm not sure if anybody has, because either an officer present might be able to answer you, otherwise I would refer you to go straight back to the portfolio by email or something. But has anybody got any questions to ask about the two dashboards, which are Edward's, the leaders, and Diana's, the planning? Pardon? Sorry. Councillor Wade, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question, it's just a comment. I'm very pleased to see we aren't cutting and pasting the key activities under the specific actions anymore, as they did in the past, but look forward to seeing more, the dashboards being designed sometime in the future to be more data-driven documents rather than very wordy, Chairman. That's all.
Right. Thank you very much. Did I see a hand raised on the other side? No? Thank you very much. In that case, thank you, Councillor Davis, portfolio holder, for turning up. I don't know if anybody has any questions to raise about it. Can I ask you to present it to the panel if you wish to identify any particular points?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get to the dashboard, just a few words and a bit of a verbal update on what's going on. As you probably are aware, in any event, obviously the waste programme is progressing, having been passed in July. In terms of car parks, I will just say that I'm being made aware that the Taddyford Gap car park machine has been removed. Some of us know Taddyford Gap for the wrong reasons, persistent vandalism, etc. So it's very expensive to replace these machines. So the signage will be put up there, but there'll be online payments only from now on. We'll see how that goes. From the coastal services side, you'll be getting a significant update from Steve later on, shortly after this. But for me, this week has been all about H2L, really. That's Hurst to Lymington. We've all had a briefing on Monday, which was enlightening, but brilliant, in fact. There's a fascinating update on the shortlisted options. I attended the stag this morning. Unfortunately, it's not a proper stag. It's actually the strategic advisory group. But it was again looking at the shortlisted options, but this time in tandem with members of the public, interested groups from outside the council and the EA, and these include the Keyhaven Forum, English Heritage and Leamington Harbour Authority. So it's now widening its reach before it goes to public consultation and, well, presentation shortly. So it's all going well from that perspective. With regard to the actual dashboard now, again, quite a bit's been going on. What I will do is I'll just focus on the high risk areas, if that's okay with you, Chairman. The actual service disruptions that we all became familiar with has been scaled down to amber. Service levels have significantly improved. Obviously, the team are continuing with their recruitment process and using agency staff where necessary. So that has been, as far as I'm concerned, being very well managed in a challenging time. So that's very good indeed. With regard to number of resources and specialist skills, then yes, I think that probably is something that most authorities are being challenged with right now. There are, that's no different when you come to the coastal work also. So I think the actual Lymington strategy and various other pieces of work that are going on there will actually reduce the risk of failure because we're constantly working hard to clear any issues. There's a note here from last time about the high risk area of fluctuations in market values of mixed dry recycling, the DMR. And this is something that obviously is going to affect every collection authority. I think this is an important time to remind people that we need to have uncontaminated dry mixed recycling. So in other words, no dirty pizza boxes, as Councillor Jeremy Heron will remind me. But basically to make sure that we are as clean as possible when we do recycle. So I think that is something that's going well. And again, part of the waste program delivery will be enhanced communications as well. So again, I think that's going to radically improve over time. Obviously, you'll note from the key performance indicator that we're still red on the household recycling. But that's because even though we improved in the last quarter, we are still well below our target of 55%. That's all I've got for now, Chairman.
Right. Thank you, Steve. Does anybody any questions they wish to raise about the dashboard? No? Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Gunnar Davis. Right. Item 5, it's our friendly waste manager again, Chris Noble, good afternoon. Can I ask you to bring us up to date?
Yes, no problem. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. A relatively short report, I would say, probably in comparison to some of the previous waste updates, but we felt it was important to just update the panel on progress since July when we've approved the waste strategy. So I'll just go through sort of the two main sections of the report briefly now to pull out the key points. So the waste strategy was approved by the panel in June and then subsequently by Cabinet and Council in July 2022. So since then we've been working on some of the implementation planning and project planning that we need to do to make the new strategy a success. I'll come on to a bit more about that in a moment, but just to cover first a bit of an update on the national consultations in terms of where we are. So last round of national consultations closed more than 12 months ago now in the summer of last year. And we are still awaiting the government's response to that consultation process. They have released some information about extended producer responsibility, which I've listed in the report in section 3.2. So they have confirmed that extended producer responsibility funding, which originates from the packaging sector, will fund the full net cost of dealing with packaging waste by April 2024. That UK authorities will be required to calculate their collection costs to determine how efficient and effective they are, because government have made it clear that the packaging sector should only fund services where they are indeed efficient and effective, and that's obviously been a driving force behind our waste strategy. Some of the details, I think, about exactly how costs will be measured, how it will be compared, and how the funding will therefore be dished out from the packaging producers, I think, still got quite a bit of work to be done on them, and government are working on that at the moment, along with RAP, who are helping them with that work. One thing we do now know is that glass will not be included within the scope of an extended producer responsibility. Will be included within the scope of an extended producer responsibility scheme. I do read my papers. Go on. But it won't be part of a deposit return scheme, which is where the 10 or 15p is added to the cost of the item in the shop. So glass will be out of scope for that deposit return scheme, and the deposit return scheme will instead just focus on plastic bottles and metal cans. Plastic film will be required to be collected for recycling by 2027. That is indeed in our plans for the future of our service, working with the county to build the infrastructure to enable us to sort that material from other parts of the recycling stream. So unfortunately, as summarised in 3.5, we don't have any other timescales at the moment for hearing more from government about the consistency, consultations and the DRS. So as soon as we do, of course, I shall return to update the panel. Just moving on to some other bits that have been going on in the last couple of months. So procurement is underway for a new operations ICT system, which has already had funding approved by Cabinet. And that includes elements around route planning, better customer experience, more customer self-service, and better communication with customers, better communication with staff as well when they're out and about performing their duties for us, collecting rubbish, etc. And we're working on that now to have a new supplier in place early next calendar year. We're having some supplier presentations and things at the moment, so that work is progressing at quite a good pace now. Work is continuing with our Hampshire colleagues on future financial arrangements between the waste collection authorities across the county and the county council as the disposal authority. So we shall continue those discussions to make sure we come up with something that works and can help to fund the future waste services and future infrastructure for the county. So I think really probably point 4.4 summarises what we've been doing in the since the strategy was approved really in July. It's starting to put into effect the key recommendations from the waste strategy about the future service change. So as you'll all appreciate, the amount of sort of planning and project planning, logistics planning, etc. to make that service change needs to start sort of in earnest now. So in particular, vehicle requirements and procurement processes and containers as well, the bins themselves and the logistical planning around that. Working with county colleagues on the timeline for the new MRF so that we can facilitate the move to twin stream recycling collections. And in the interim, whilst we are obviously preparing to make the frontline service change, we are now beginning to look at our plan for greater levels of work on waste reduction in the interim period so that we can try and get some performance improvements in the service before we make the frontline service change. I think that's a fair summary, Chairman, but I'll happily take any questions.
Yes, indeed. Can I just ask a question, Chris, about the new MRF? They have a site already available?
They do have a site, and it's going through planning in the next couple of months. I think it's going at the moment to October's planning committee at the county, because it's waste infrastructure. It's a county council planning function. Yes. So although the site is located in Eastleigh, it will be a Hampshire County Council planning decision. Yes.
Good. Oh, well, at least that's moving anyway. Yes, so Councillor Ring.
Thank you, Chair. I note from the report and your comments, no word yet, I assume, from government on what might happen regarding garden waste, because that could be fairly significant for us, couldn't it? And presumably we're putting in some contingency planning.
Yeah, so that is in particular with regard to government's sort of intention that they've expressed in the past that garden waste collections should be provided free of charge to residents. And as we know, we charge within this district, and the vast majority of other councils do charge as well. So that is one thing we are waiting to hear back from. That's one thing they consulted on again last year, and it's the consultation that ended in July last year, and I'm afraid we're still waiting to hear what the outcome of that is. What they have said is that if that were to be brought into effect, they would deal with that as a new burden on local authorities in terms of the financial burden. But again, more detail needed on the exact terms of that funding if indeed they do decide to make garden waste collections free for all.
Thank you. Before you, Councillor Wade, Councillor Tipp, you were next, please.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. One is, has there been anything mentioned about the effect on prices of the packaging waste being met by the businesses? That's one thing that I'd be interested to know, if there's been any idea of what that effect might be. I mean, we're living in a cost of living crisis after all. And the second's a very small point, but as I've got you here, so I've been told by some people that when you recycle a plastic container, you should squash it flat and put the lid back on. And yet I thought we weren't supposed to recycle the lids with the containers. Perhaps you could clear that one up for me as well.
I'll take that one first because that's probably the easier of the two. Yeah, it's changed relatively recently. Veolia, the operator of the MRF, didn't used to want the lids coming into the sorting facility, into the MRF. But that changed relatively recently, within the last couple of years, I think. So yeah, the sort of request of customers now is to squash bottles, put the lid back on. That's right. So they. So obviously that's going to lead to a loss of lids. Yes. All I would say is if people are recycling them via that route that you just mentioned, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Is there any idea of prices? Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid I wouldn't have anything in front of me. Of course, as government have been developing the sort of framework around extended producer responsibility, they've been engaging with the likes of us as people who incur the cost of dealing with the packaging. They've also been engaging with the packaging sector itself and the various retail bodies there are, like the British Retail Consortium and the various sort of packaging organisations that there are that represent packaging manufacturers. And I'm sure they've probably had a different view on the proposals compared to local authorities, and they may well have done some work on what the expected cost of that is. So I can take that away and see if I can find that out and feed that back to the panel. Yeah, no problem. Councillor Wade, please.
Well, actually, Councillor Tipp actually asked one of the questions I wanted to ask. Actually, I've got two, but I'll just explore that business about the packaging companies paying for the packaging, the producers paying for the packaging. The current government wants to be, in inverted commas, a low tax government, and to make package suppliers pay for that, they would need to pay some sort of tax or subsidy on that process. With the change in political direction in Westminster, is it conceivable that there may well be a change on that and we'll end up having to foot more of the bill than we thought? I know this is a hypothetical question, but I'm sure the last month of what the candidates were saying, it's quite logical that somebody might have thought of this. And the other question is dead simple, because I've asked you before. A resident asked me, what happens to all the old bins in the New Forest when we don't need them anymore? And you said you're going to find out from other areas what they did with it, because we'll have multiple thousands of black plastic bins that need to be disposed of when the wheelie bins come.
Recycle them. Melt them down.
Yeah, okay. So first question around EPI and sort of whether that's under threat, I guess, given the wider sort of situation we're in nationally. I probably can't really add anything other than what's sort of already out there in the public domain about general government direction and things. I think obviously a lot of the reforms were brought in with the intentions of trying to meet things like the climate change commitments and improving consistency across the whole country. That EPR is really important to enable the funding for local authorities to improve that consistency. So it kind of underpins everything that government's been trying to do since it introduced the National Waste Strategy in 2018. So it is really important. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what the outcome from the consultations is when government do announce that, which we hope will be sooner rather than later. I probably can't say any more than that. I'm afraid. Yeah, bins. Yeah, so I'm not sure I've got an answer for you right now. I think as part of our logistical planning, it is one of the things that's very much on our agenda, that we are aware that is an issue that we will need to look at. So we will continue to develop that plan and come up with some thoughts on that. Yes, yeah, sure, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chris. Oh, Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to pick up again on bottles and lids on and lids off. My understanding was that we didn't put the lids on because they would fall through when the things are being sifted and finish up back at Marchwood to be incinerated. So if now we're being encouraged to leave the lids on, albeit whether we squash or don't squash the bottles, I guess if we don't squash the bottles, there's a vacuum created there. But anyway, what is happening to those lids? Are they now saying that they can recycle those lids in with the other material? Is that what they're saying? This is a different sorter, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So and that's the reason for putting them back on the bottle. So you're quite right. If they're loose, they tend to be too small to be picked up as plastic items within the sorting facility and will fall through the gap, so to speak. And whereas if they're on the bottle, they can be separated with the bottle, and then they'll go off to be shredded in a plastic recycling facility that will then sort out the different types of plastic. So sometimes the lid can be a different type of plastic to the bottle, but once they're shredded, they've got the kit in there to sort one type of plastic from the other, so that would be sorted out.
Even in a shredded state?
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
It's called technology.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Right, anybody? That's fine. Thank you very much, Chris. Claire, item number 6, Transport South East Strategic Investment Plan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So, members, what I'm going to do is just run you through the consultation that's currently a live consultation for the panel's information. So, just to refresh members' minds, the Transport for South East is a partnership that was established in 2017. And the purpose of the partnership is to determine transport infrastructure needs across the region's economy, so across quite a wide geography, stretching, not surprisingly, to the southeast, from sort of the Sussex, Surrey, and Hampshire area. So the partnership is made up of the relevant local enterprise partnerships, the relevant transport authorities and district council representatives. And the purpose is to identify at a strategic level the transport infrastructure needs across the area. So through the partnership, a transport strategic investment plan has been developed, which is a 114-page document, so you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to talk you through the entire contents of that document this afternoon. And the purpose of this investment plan is to provide a blueprint for investment across the area. What the plan doesn't do is provide any funding. The plan is owned by all of us, all the partners, including this district council, and provides sort of a sequence of plans for multimodal investment packages and talks to the different transport interventions that might be appropriate across the wider area. And obviously, in the absence of having that more strategic overview, it might be that different county councils and other transport authorities are planning their own transport investment plans in isolation from adjoining authorities, which clearly would be challenging given highway networks and transport facilities run across administrative boundaries. So the package of plans identified in this investment plan seeks to address 8 investment priorities, which include decarbonisation and environmental issues, adapting to the new norm in a sort of post-pandemic world, levelling up left behind communities, regeneration and growth, world-class urban transport systems, transforming east-west connectivity, resilience on radial corridors and global gateways and freight. So the projects identified in the plan come to a eye-watering sum of money, which is obviously a really high-level calculation, but in the region of £6.45 billion. Yeah, so sort of most relevant to us, to regional packages, and Steve, if you can go to my next slide, thank you, that relate to this area. So the first is what's called the South Hampshire Package of Interventions. So this includes a series of interventions which picks up rail interventions, and will include things such as the Waterside branch line reopening package is identified within this, but obviously this isn't the project or any form of decision making. Timetable changes to maximise capacity at Southampton Central, which obviously has implications for our district, and sidings at Totton and solutions around level crossing constraints within that area. Also identified for our area is the improvements to the A326 capacity enhancement, the smart motorway initiative that's been run out with target junction enhancements, including the Southampton area, and the current project that a lot of you will be familiar with, the A31 Ringwood improvements. Also identified as an investment priority is the mass transit system that's being considered as part of the greater Southampton city regions, which does include this area, which is looking at sort of multimodal transport and connectivity, including the potential of a tram, ferries and bus rapid transport. This is reflective of the bus rapid transport project that's been rolled out across the Portsmouth city region. And naturally, there are also opportunities for pedestrian and cycle improvements being unlocked, including access to public space in towns and cities. There are also longer-term measures, and there's a particular focus on increasing the journey distance between Portsmouth and Southampton. So whilst not directly relevant to the district, it does have implications and potential positive opportunities for us. So also being looked at is, and Steve, if you could just go to the next slide, thank you, is the improvement of travel, freight capacity, but also improvements to the ferry links and speeding up. And obviously most relevant to this district is the link between Leamington and Yarmouth. So funding allocations for strategic connectivity interventions are generally provided through delivery agencies, so such as Network Rail and National Highways, from government budgets, and the majority of the investment identified through the projects in this consultation will be expected to be established, through central government funding rather than at a local level. So members, this is a consultation. It will be a portfolio decision, but generally it's felt that the proposals identified as potential interventions across our immediate area and across the sub-region will be positive for the new forest, for connectivity, and helping to address the 8 priorities that are identified in this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Did I hear right that the investment plan has a budget of 6.45 billion?
No, it's got no budget.
Well, sorry.
That would be the money required to deliver the contents.
Because this is just a wish list. It hasn't got any funding yet, but you've got to have the plan before you can get the funding.
That's absolutely right. The purpose of putting the plan together is to identify strategically what's going to deliver the best outcomes across the whole area, and then to help use the plan to influence government thinking around funding priorities, but also at a local level to enable us to use the plan to either campaign for or put a sort of stake in the ground that this funding needs to happen within this area and the outcomes it will achieve.
From a local funding point of view, sorry to monopolise, from a local funding point of view, would SIL be ever involved in some of this?
No, it wouldn't. So this is at a more strategic level. There have been discussions in various reforms to the planning system about different ways of SIL being used and it more being collected at a local level, but then put into central government funding, and that may be what happens going forward.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bennison.
Anybody else? Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions, if I may. In this investment plan, is it including the upgrade that's been talked about for the A326? So in other words, the dualling.
So in terms of the improvements to the A326, taking aside what those improvements might be, that's already identified by the Department of Transport in its major projects as a project that's been funded. And as you're probably aware, them now moving to creating that strategic business case. So it's been through 2 gateways of funding already through the Department of Transport. So that's identified as a project, but it's also referenced the fact that it's already part funded as it moves from concept through to scheme development.
So it doesn't sort of need to be in this, so to speak, because it's already at one stage further on.
It does need to be in this because part of the purpose of this is to actually identify how different interventions then link to different transport opportunities. So it's not simply a shopping list of funding, it's actually looking at it a little bit more strategically and thinking if you improve this, then the implications for the wider network are X, Y, and Z. Okay.
And second question, if I may, and this is on the cycling and walking routes. Many months, I think it was years ago, we all got together and we drew on these plans. You know what I'm talking about. The Marchwood path that's in existence that goes down to Ealing, from that point onwards, they appear still to be talking about extending that down Ealing Lane. Now, I've said this dozens of times, the landowner will give the land on the right-hand side of that road to extend that path all the way down to the traffic lights at, I call it Houndsdown, I'm not quite sure. And I even had a conversation with County to see if they could organise those traffic lights so they could filter in a pause where people could cross there, which they said was easy to do. But I keep looking to see what's going on. The last I heard was they're still directing this path down Ealing Lane, which is all on a road. Why?
Okay, I'll just pick that on throughout. So in terms of the LC whip for the water side, and I do like your description of traffic lights, that's still in development stage. I've been in discussion with the county over the last couple of weeks about how we actually now do that next consultation phase, because you're right, it was back in September 2019 that that we had the workshop, we got felted pens out and all those sort of capturing all that local knowledge. There has been clearly a lot of work going on in the interim, but there does need to be a further consultation so that we can actually get into that granular level of detail to make sure that we have got it right and actually made the most of the plan.
Are they aware that the landowner will give this land?
I'm sure if that's been passed on to the county, they will.
I don't think when we had those in 2019, I've forgotten when it was, that offer hadn't been made. It was made subsequent to that.
Yes, so there has been various discussions with landowners, etc. So I'm sure they will be aware, particularly if you've mentioned that. But in terms of that next step, you know, there will be another consultation to go through those granular details about what's been proposed and whether that's actually what's the best solution.
Okay. Well, it would be good not to lose it. The reason I mention it again was it was brought up at a national park meeting by Caroline Rackham, actually, because she had picked up on this and she said, why are they taking it down Ealing Lane? So
can I just intervene? We're getting very detailed about a subject which isn't detailed at all. So if you'd like to carry on afterwards,
yes. Okay.
I'd be grateful.
If you could pick that up, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Right, on to item 7, coastal services. I'm sorry, Malcolm, you're quite right. Councillor Wade, please.
Thank you. Claire, yes, early on in your presentation, you mentioned that Hampshire has got its own transport plan and it hasn't really engaged with the authorities, the other district authorities at the same time. If this is what we're going to do, that's the sort of thing it came across. I'll elaborate a little bit, then you can understand where I'm coming from. This is a top-level strategic plan of where the money, or well, the finance of it. From my understanding, to quote the A326 as an example, Hampshire's plan is they're only going to dual it west of Totton. They're not going to borrow it. The rest is going to remain single carriage road all the way. So how do we as an authority, taking into account Hampshire's already got their master plan, how do we get an influence on the transport arrangements for the waterside in a multimodal sense? Because the train presumably is a separate entity that's done by Network Wales. So although it's part of multimodal, it's not included in this money. So how do we get an influence into it? If Hampshire's already done its line in the sand, we're going to do this. How do we influence and add things to it?
Okay, so we do work quite closely with the county as a planning authority, and I think probably increasingly we're working jointly, identifying that you can't create a place like through a spatial plan or through planning, it's about placemaking, and then do a transport piece completely independently. The things need to be intrinsically linked to one another and understand, you know, what you're trying to achieve and where your growth pressures are, etc. So we do work very closely with the county. We are working with them to inform and develop the waterside transport strategy. The A326 is obviously sort of a little bit of a technical piece at the moment. So again, we do have officer meetings, and some of those meetings are more as key stakeholders having strategic discussions, and some of the meetings are more in a sort of regulatory capacity, sort of so through this is a planning this is the sort of planning application world, and the county council are potential applicants, and we are then either the consultee or the determining authority. So different levels of conversations with different officers in, but we are working very closely with the county on all those different transport, and indeed, you know, we're leading on some things ourselves as well. So there is really a close, and I think increasingly closer working relationship between district and county to make sure that we plan for growth in the correct way, and that we don't just come up with highway solutions sort of in isolation from what's actually happening within the environment. And I think that's probably reflected as well in their LTP4, which does need them to take a different approach in the way they work collaboratively with the spatial planning authorities.
Okay.
So they're the driver, but we're able to influence the direction to a degree. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Thank you, Claire. Right, let's move on. Item 7, as I've said before, coastal services update, and it's Steve Cook to illuminate. Just back from his celebratory event on Monday morning.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What I'm just going to run through really is a broad overview of sort of coastal works we've got ongoing now and going to be going until the end of the financial year. So, as already been mentioned by Councillor Davis, we've got the 2 flood and coastal erosion risk management strategies. We've done various updates on those. Just as a very quick overview of some engagement work coming forward on them. So just to sort of refresh, we have the Christchurch Bay and Harbour strategy. So that runs from Christchurch Harbour in the west to BCP district area through to the start of Hurst Spit. And then we have Hurst to Lymington strategy, which runs from the start of Hurst Spit through to the eastern side of Lymington River. I think a really key point about the 2 strategies is Hurst is a sort of anchor point, the link between the 2. And so the 2 project teams work on these are sort of working together, working in collaboration to make sure that the impacts within both sides are taken into account and how that may affect how Hurst Spit is managed and developed. So just a brief bit on the next step. So with Christchurch Bay, we had some really good engagement, public engagement through a couple of events in July, and we are now on the process, or the consultants of developing what is the long list options. So this is almost anything and anything that can be considered. And that will lead through to the next round of engagement, which is planned to start sort of the end of October through November and into actually about middle of December. That will be a mixture of member briefings, a survey, physical drop-in events, and sort of online briefings as well, so to give everyone the opportunity to attend and comment on those. And current programme at the moment for that strategy is for spring 2024, so still quite a long period to go on that. With regard to Hurst to Lymington, there's also been a lot, particularly this week, of engagements. We had the member briefing on Monday, and as Councillor Davis mentioned, we've had a first and still ongoing at the moment stakeholder event at Brockenhurst Village Hall. That will follow on through the rest of September with a further stakeholder event next week, and then there will be a series of drop-in events for the community, members of the public, and they will be at Milford-on-Sea and Lymington. And as well as that, there will be an online briefing as well. So again, people have the opportunity to attend if they can't go during the daytime. And again, completion for that is really about 2 years' time or so from now, before that strategy is adopted. But there is, there's lots going on both of those, and it's really good, the engagement we've had so far, lots of member engagement and involvement, and that will, continue for the next couple of years. So a little bit on to sort of maintenance work. So it's just an update to inform what is currently happening and what's on the plan for the rest of the year. So we are literally this week just commenced works down at Milford through a programme of timber groin maintenance and beach recharge. So timber groin maintenance ongoing to 3 timber groins, basically sort of fronting the concrete beach huts down at Milford. That will go on through most of this month, and that was obviously tidal working. So normally they start early in the morning and then work later in the evening as well to suit the tides. We are then, same as part of that same contract, we'll be looking to bring in some beach recharge material in the order of about 4,500 tonnes to that beach. That is a piece of work we've done annually now since about 2008. That will aid in improving the beach levels and protecting the seawall there. So we're seeing some quite rapid changes in beach levels along that frontage. So that will aid us in sort of providing protection to the wall. But of course that material will move. Comments we sometimes get from the public that it's moved, and obviously as we, with the coastline, shingle moves west to east, longshore drift, part of those sort of natural coastal processes. But we are still in the throes of trying to finalise the licence, which we have to have for that material. It's taken a rather long time to get that in place. Added benefits of this are, a couple of projects I'll talk about in a minute, is reducing the height from the promenade to the beach level. So at sections along there is quite a significant drop from the prom in front of the huts down to the beach, say through those changing beach levels. And we're actually seeing quite a lot of exposed metal work. So that may be old wartime defences or old coastal defences, probably put in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And that is causing us a few issues. So sort of around a bit of an update on that, we have through this summer spent quite a lot of money employing a contractor to cut that metal out of the beach, because it tends to, so as the tide comes in, it gets covered up, so people can't see it if they're swimming. And next week, subject to weather conditions, we will also have a dive team coming in to try and cut some further metal out that's a bit further offshore. So it's all just about the actions we're trying to do to try and keep that area as safe as we can, but it's a bit of an ongoing challenge down there. And then the next main piece of work really for our maintenance budget this year is at Calshot. So that'll be timber groin repairs again and some shingle recycling this time. So that work is yet to be tendered, but we'll be sort of putting that work together to go out probably in the next month or so with a view to commencement early 2023. And that will involve replacement of timber piles to the defences, and then recycling of material from the activity centre. So we work with Hampshire County Council there, where material moves around the spit to the end. They take it off a slipway because it sort of obstructs that, and we will basically pick it up and put it back on the spit where it came from. So sort of rather sustainable piece of work. So you can just keep that material in the main section of that beach.
Steve, can I ask a question? Whilst you had that last slide, the middle item was the removal of metal. Where did it source from? Was it something from the last war, or was it some sort of beach management of years ago?
I would say it's mixed. So we are aware of World War II defences. Mm-hmm. You may recall a number of years ago we removed a lot along at Hordle Cliff. And every now and again, as the beach levels change, it's still amazing what gets exposed. So I think it may be a mixture of that, but also a mixture, we think, whether it is an old slipway or some old defences, probably constructed in the 1960s. And so they tend to be steel sheet pile structures that run out. And you can see them, I haven't got a pointer, but well, they don't actually show up very good on that image, but where we're finding them now is towards the end of the timber groin, so it's very hard to reach them at low water because we don't have much of a tidal range, hence the reason for needing divers to come in. Yeah. But it's an ongoing battle, really, even after all this time.
Thank you.
So a bit on some capital work. So I mentioned about handrails. So we are out to tender at the moment. So we have within the capital programme budget for putting handrails along the promenade area that fronts the beach huts at Milford. That piece of work is it goes a little bit hand in hand with the beach recycling, because the beach recycling will reduce that height, but the beach materials obviously is mobile, so it doesn't always stay there. And what we really experienced this year is that a level, particularly at that eastern end, really dropping. And that top image there, I mean, that actually looks better than it was a few weeks ago, but that drop is about 2.5 metres. And so through some risk assessments and working with the health and safety team, we sort of identified, there are some mitigation measures needed here. We are a landowner, so we can't not address this risk. And so we are, out to tender to look to install a handrail along that frontage. Mixed feelings about this from the public, because the beach levels vary, of course, as you go along there. So some areas at the moment, beach levels are much better. but in the past they've been much lower. So it's trying to address that risk overall, and we will hopefully be appointing a contractor soon once tenders are back, so we can look to put that work in place. Another piece of capital work we've got going on, we've talked about before, is Barton on Sea and sort of trials, drainage trials to how we manage groundwater. We are just going through the process of appointing a consultant for that piece of work, someone who's worked for us a lot in the past, and that will be for them to design the drainage trial, and there's some sort of high-tech systems that potentially be looked at there. And then following that, we will need to undertake a procurement process to appoint a contractor to install, but also to put in some monitoring equipment. So you need to be able to monitor, you know, how effective this system may be on the groundwater levels. So that's sort of progressing along at the moment. And then the last bit of work is Hurst Spit, North Point. So we typically undertake works there about every 4 years, recycling material from the very tip of the spit back onto the main body of the spit. We're looking to undertake that work. It may be this year, I think more likely next year, because our window of opportunity are quite constricted because of the environment, bird life and so on. So we've tendered that work, but we are now looking to try and progress sort of funding. So there's different funding streams required for that. So some for New Forest, some from Environment Agency, and we're looking to have some discussions with Historic England as well, who obviously manage the castle, about how we can progress that. So that's sort of on the programme, and hopefully, if it doesn't happen this year, that will take place next year, but probably we're limited to sort of March or October, really. It's quite a tight working window. And then the last bit of an update is we've recently put together a report sort of around coastal water safety. So this is where, as a council, we own land or we lease land that is close to the open sea or Southampton Water and various places like that, to look at reviewing the measures we have in place. So there was a piece of work done about 15 years ago, back in 2007, which looked at the beach sites, so those main sites, Calshot, Hordle, Milford, Barton, and assessed risks and hazards. That was done with the RNLI. And through that piece of work, various beach safety signs were put in and public rescue equipment, and that all essentially follows the guidance set out by the RNLI, which is sort of a national piece of guidance that's followed. But what we've identified, there are other sites that need to be assessed as well. So they may not be a beach, but they are near the coast. So we need to look at those as, you know, what are the risks and hazards there. And it might be that signage and rescue equipment isn't required, but we need to do those assessments to undertake that and determine that need. And as part of that work, we're going to develop a coastal water safety policy, which will really just set out how we manage, how we inspect, how we review these sites, what the risks and hazards are, what we need to do to comply with health and safety guidance, legislation and so on. And then as a follow-on from that, we will look to see if we can start to develop a sort of New Forest water safety forum. So in other organisations, they'll have forums that are formed of the local authority, the RNLI, maybe the Maritime Coast Guard. So those organisations and agencies who have an involvement in water, managing water, using water, so to try and get a more sort of joined up approach across the area. Mm-hmm. We're already engaged with our RNLI, and I've already had discussions with the Hampshire Marine Police Unit as well about some of the work they do. So that's a piece of work we're sort of starting now, and then will be completed over the next few months or so. And that, I think, that was the last point. So yeah, open to if there's any questions or any points to be asked.
Can I just to enumerate your last points about that was coastal safety, coastal water safety, but we have rivers running through our district, and while swimming this summer was a sport that got popularity. There's ponds and lakes. Is it a landowner problem, or do we as a district, as it's in our district, have a responsibility for some of that safety features you're referring to?
That I think really will be picked up separate to this, because we're looking at the coastal. But if we own land that is near or adjacent a stream, a ditch, a river, a lake, we need to be thinking about assessing.
Yes.
What needs to be, and then it's not saying that you need to put signs and rescue equipment everywhere, but you just need to determine is there a risk or not. So that is certainly another piece of work, but not district wide. It's where we own the land.
Oh yeah.
So because obviously there's lots of rivers that pass through the district.
Yeah, you'll have different numbers. Thank you, Steve. I saw a hand up. Yes, Councillor Tipp, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there's a lot of interest now, a lot of importance placed on the contamination of the solent with nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's something that I know that the planning people are very concerned about. Do we as a council measure the levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in the solent? And if we do we have records of it, and how is it doing?
So we don't have a statutory responsibility to measure nitrates and phosphates in the solent, but it is a measure, and it's mainly the DEFRA bodies, Environment Agency, and then Environment Agency informing Natural England of the increase in phosphates and nitrates in watercourses and ultimately within the solent. So it sits outside the council.
Well, do we get informed of the results of the Environment Agency's measurements?
The results are available, but they don't write to us telling us this is the result.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Wade, please. I don't know, a hand up as not. Councillor Bellers, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you.
Please do.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for the presentation and everything that you're doing. I find that really fascinating, and obviously I can see there's a lot of work going on. But just a genetic, whatever the word is, question. Was her spit originally man-made, or did the shingle arrive naturally over the years like Chesil did?
It's natural, isn't it?
It would have been natural many years ago, but if it's for the last 30 or so years, it's generally been managed. So you could almost say it's man-made now, but initially it's a natural feature. But as a council, we've managed it, particularly since 1996, quite heavily. But we're trying to, and within this Hurst to Lymington strategy, is trying to look to manage the spit in a natural way. So rather than work against what it wants to do through the coast, and that is to work with that sort of natural development.
Right, it's just that down at Chesil, all the stones there have evolved over the years, and they all come from one beach in Devon, and they're still coming. So did all the shingle come from one place for this? What's changed? Is it still coming, or has it stopped coming? Obviously it would have come with tides and things, because Chesil Beach and spit is still growing.
Yeah, so for Hurst, generally the shingle, as it goes sort of west to east, but we're probably fairly constrained within Christchurch Bay. So you've got Paul Bay and then into Christchurch Bay. So again, many years ago, the cliffs would have been, if you like, the feed material to the beaches and to Hurst. So where you have erosion of the cliffs, which would have happened at Barton and Hordle Cliff and Milford, that would have been the feed and the source of that material, as well as some, further west and coming through from other sites, that feed has reduced, and that's partly because obviously we defend the coastline at Barton and Milford and other sites. So where you're not getting the erosion, you're not getting that sort of enough material in the system, which is why you then start to look at, well, how do you manage that by importing shingle and doing it that way. So it's, it would have been natural for a long time, but that's what we're seeing when I sort of talked about the beach volumes. We're seeing beach volumes reduce quite significantly at Milford and Hall Cliff because there's not that material coming from the west. And why is it not coming from the west? Because there's not so much erosion. So that's part of the issue. But we want to try and manage it in as much as a sustainable way as we can by using material that's available. Hurst as well is probably it's almost the poor feature of the bay because it's almost at the end of the line, if you like. So if there's erosion and material being deposited, it may be deposited at Nash, at Barton, Hordle Cliff, Milford. So Hurst is like at the end of that chain, really, of where that material is moving through.
Okay, so is it a bit of a catch-22 situation because we're stopping the erosion further on up, it's not coming down to Hurst, so now we've got to stop the erosion and save Hurst spit as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a common feature around the coastline. You defend your urban areas, and when you've got lots of assets, and whether it's property, commercial, so you defend those areas. But by defending those areas, you reduce the amount of erosion. So it is a bit catch-22, but that's part of with the strategies of working in that much wider area. So rather than looking at, say, Hurst or Milford in isolation, you look at the whole bay and say, right, it's trying to get a much more joined up approach rather than one council saying, well, I'm going to do this and it doesn't matter what happens down the line. So that's why we're working with BCP and the other partners to have a much better approach to ensuring that your impacts are not too detrimental, from, say, further down in the east to what happens in the west. It's a challenge.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Councillor Wade.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Not forgotten.
Yeah, that's a very good presentation, and it's a lot of very focused and detailed work is done on the coast from Lymington to the west, and it's very pleasing to see a bit of TLC given the Calshot spit because it is a bit tired. It may not have as old historical significance as her spit, but it still has historical significance. The question I want to ask is, we've done all this in the west. Now, I'm the only person in the room that represents a eastern seaboard community, if you pardon the expression, and we're about to have massive development along the waterside. And with the climate change and the conditions of the sea, that is an area that as yet hasn't had the benefit of such close, in-depth work from this authority as the Western, Lymington to the west has. Are we planning to start to focus on the east? Because you've done a great job on the west, and all compliment for that. But the east, particularly even more so now with development, is going to need some serious attention because we have flooding, areas that flooded and so forth. So that's really the question. Are we turning our attention to the east?
I think, the reason the west, first of all, gets the prime focus is because, first of all, that is, as a council, primarily where we own defences and land, rather than particularly from, if I think of the rest of the district from the strategies finishing, which is from Lymington through to Calshot and then up the waterside. So we own a lot more assets, and that western end is much more vulnerable and exposed because of the prevailing winds and storms. If I a quick whistle stops tour from Lymington up to the waterside, we only as a council own Calsh rock, really. There's a couple of little bits as you go to the waterside.
But we are responsible for the coast, aren't we?
We are, it depends how you define responsible. So we are the Coast Protection Authority, but we have no duty to protect.
So, can you say that again, sorry?
So as New Forest District Council is the Coast Protection Authority, so we have a coastline, but no Coast Protection Authority has any duty to undertake flood and coastal erosion activities.
So to be clear, no Coastal Protection Authority has a duty to do anything?
No.
I just find that interesting, actually.
Can I maybe step in, because whilst we may not have that duty as a coastal authority, in our capacity as a planning authority, we do have a duty to understand the impact of climate change in terms of sea level rises, and also the implications of development on the coastline, and ensure that in allowing any development that it is designed to address changes in sea levels, and also has any appropriate flood defences that are required to actually protect that new development. So as you know, at Forley we've got 2 coastal measures in place. There'll be very, very complex flood defences being constructed as part of that scheme, but also there's a need to increase ground levels to a point to address changes in climate. So we've sort of got that dual role as a council in terms of our coastal team, but also in terms of how we plan and protect future residents. So sort of up the coastline, and we are in discussion with the Environment Agency about the waterside, because they have done a piece of work in Southampton, and so we're in a discussion around what might that piece of work look like across the waterside. But, you know, taking on board Steve's point that an awful lot of the land along the waterside is in private ownership, and therefore sort of will probably come forward sort of organically on the back of development, rather than there being need for significant intervention by a public body. So, you know, there'll be other examples of where flood defences come into play on the back of development up the waterside.
Can I just come back? So, but what we could do, the Environment Agency presumably is the body that would provide funding, because not all of the coast is in private hands. There's bits of Hyde, for instance, that, like Prospect Place, that is owned by the parish council. So, but as a protection authority, then we can put a plan requiring funding from other agencies, because I take the point that we're not responsible for the actually doing the work, but as the protection authority, we can put the plan to help engage with the Environment Agency to get the funding to do it. Is that right?
In sort of broad terms, that can come forward, and as Claire mentioned, sort of working with the Environment Agency, so they, within their forward plan, so they have a 6-year sort of forward plan of how they're going to potentially spend money which is allocated flood and coastal protection. There are, I think, 2 or 3 schemes for the waterside. Now, not for a number of years. One of those being H strategy, so to consider effectively almost the rest of our district, but also some more sort of targeted projects around some flood protection at Hythe because of some of the issues there. But in delivering those schemes, I think they will still be a need for other funding. So, you know, none of these schemes will be 100% funded. It's really driving, you know, and identifying where is the need, what's the risk, and then, you know, assessing that against what you may put in place as a solution.
The risk is geared by the number of houses, isn't it, that could be flooded?
Yeah.
Primarily, you get benefits from lots of other sources, but primarily it's how many properties are at flood risk or erosion risk. Obviously, waterside is more, you know, the flood risk than erosion, so it's primarily driven by that. And if those numbers don't stack up, effectively your potential grant aid, which is what comes from the government, reduces. So then you have a gap to fill, to try and fund, with bringing in various partners. So it is a real challenge, and I think the reason the West, I say, is being worked on more, the risk is, at the moment, is far greater there. But as I say, the EA do have a forward plan of where they've identified some potential projects for
the east,
for the eastern side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Steve. Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. In your second slide, I think it was, you were talking about drainage of the cliff and new technologies or new ways of doing it. Could you say a little bit more about how they're going to do that? Because I believe there was some talk about draining within the land rather than whatever the other technique was.
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking at there is called horizontal directional drilling. So rather than just, say, digging a trench and putting a pipe in it, you have a system that typically you would go from the bottom of the cliff and put a pipe through the cliff and up to there's a nice wide grassed area there. And you do that, it sort of forms a curve. Basically, you have something that will almost tunnel a hole through, called a mole, and pull this pipe through. It's more difficult to do at Barton because of the instability sort of from below the top of the cliff. So you've got to do that from the top more and go down this way. And it's actually quite technical how you do that. And the other technicalities around that about where you actually put that pipe, because you've got to get that pipe within the areas of where the groundwater is, and that pipe would be perforated, so you have lots of holes in it. So water drains into it and then out through. So rather than just draining through the cliff, it then drains through a pipe into the sea.
Down to the foot.
Yeah, and this is not about taking all the groundwater out or stopping erosion, but it's about trying to manage it and control it a bit more, and maybe keep us at more summer rainfall levels. This summer's been a bit different, but typically, because we know that winter rainfall, typically from October to about March, is when we will start to see movement. And if we get 100 millimetres of rainfall a month, we get that for 3 months, we know we're going to start to see some ground movement. So it's a bit about testing these systems and does it work. So that's why it would be in some sort of a targeted spot, and then if that works, and it's a period of a couple of years of monitoring, and then rolling that out, subject to funding, across the wider frontage.
So I guess it's decreasing the saturation point in various places, oversaturation, which then brings the cliff down.
Yeah, and because what we know, Sue, is that Barton, the driver for erosion at Barton is not the sea, it's groundwater.
Yeah.
And that's either rainfall coming directly on the site or rainfall falling in the forest, and then it soaks down through the geology and then drains through. So it's about trying to manage that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else? No? Well, thank you for the presentation, Steve. A lot going on, and I think we'll see you again, even at the next meeting when we're not, just to update again. So thank you for that. Right, panel. Item 8 is the work programme for the next meeting, which is the 12th of January. Merry Christmas, everybody. We've got the usual talent on, as you can see, waste strategy, Claire. So yes, it's same old team, same old year or whatever. But there's a long time to go before then, so there might be 1 or 2 things else. Item 9 is dates of next meeting. Make a note, don't have holidays on those days. And item 10, there isn't anything urgent, so Thank you, everybody. I can now declare the meeting closed. And thank you for coming along.